So we have today author and also a former decorated Marine Corps officer, Elliot Ackerman. So thank you for coming on this session and to share your experiences in the Marine Corps, in your deployments in Iraq and Afghanistan, and even the various books that you've written. So thank you for your time on this session.
Yeah, my pleasure. Good to be with you.
Yeah. So Elliot, if you could, tell us how did you, basically join military, and what was your motivation?
Well, I joined the Marine Corps through what's called the Reserve Officer Training Corps in the United States, which is a program by which university students can take extra classes, do trainings in the summer, and then when they receive their university degree, they're also commissioned as officers in the U.S. military. So I did that for the Marines.
Okay.
I went to Tufts University in Boston and did that program. And then when I graduated university in 2003, the next day, I was commissioned as a second lieutenant in the Marine Corps.
Okay, got it. So if you could also speak about, the various deployment that you had in your career.
Sure. So as a Marine Corps officer, I was deployed in 2004 to 2005 to Iraq in Al-Anbar province. Probably the most significant part of that deployment was it was during the November 2004 battle for Fallujah, which I participated in as a rifle platoon commander. Then when I returned from that deployment in 2005, in August of 2005, my infantry battalion was deployed as part of the federal response to Hurricane Katrina in New Orleans. And so I spent a little more than a month down in New Orleans doing relief efforts. And then in 2006, I was deployed with the 24th Marine Expeditionary Unit to the Mediterranean. And we participated when Israel invaded, or in the Israeli-Lebanese War of 2006. We participated in the evacuation of American citizens out of Beirut. And then in really 2008 to 2011, I worked in Marine Special Operations in Afghanistan, where I served as an advisor to an Afghan commando battalion. And our mission was to capture and kill senior Taliban leadership in Western Afghanistan.
Okay. That's really interesting. I would like to, take you back to the Battle of Fallujah that you spoke about. What was your experience when you went there, as a combat leader there?
Well, I would sort of share with you some words that my commanding officer said to me when I was there. He was my company commander. He was a captain in his early 30s. And at that time, he seemed infinitely old and wise to me. And we were sitting on a rooftop one day in the battle. It was me, him, and one of the other platoon commanders. We were both second lieutenants in our early 20s. And he said to us, "You two are both the luckiest and the unluckiest Marines I've ever met." He said, "You're the luckiest because your very first deployment, this is what you do right off the bat, the biggest urban battle the Marine Corps has fought since Vietnam. You're the unluckiest because nothing you ever do is going to compare to this in intensity in your Marine Corps career." And his words proved to be prophetic. So, the battle for Fallujah was, it was very hard. It was very intense. Our platoon suffered a number of casualties, but it was very much the experience of being a small unit infantry leader in the Marine Corps. I mean, every bit of it. So whatever I was training for, I had really had the opportunity to do that first deployment in Iraq.
Okay. So I have one more question because I've seen some of your podcasts. So if you could tell me, in combat, what does leadership actually mean to you? And, how did you develop those leadership skills?
That's a great question. Oftentimes I found leadership and the leaders I worked for who I admired, I admired them not so much for what they did necessarily, but for what they knew not to do. The way they empowered their subordinates, the way they knew how to get the best out of people. Because when you're a leader, it's not about you, it's about the people you lead. And it's about you trying to lend whatever skills you have to maximizing their performance. So my same company commander, who was a great company commander, he would always make a point of, he would only sort of chime in and make the decisions that he needed to make. And if there was a decision that could be made by a platoon commander who's a lieutenant or a sergeant or a corporal, he would allow them to run their units and to do their jobs and weigh in on the decisions that were really his to make. And that might sound simple, but it's very difficult to know when you're supposed to weigh in and when you're allowed to just or when you should be letting a subordinate really just, run with their own initiative. So I think a lot of combat leadership, which is no different than any other form of leadership, is understanding how to empower the people you're working with and get the best out of them. The only thing I would add, with combat leadership is, you're obviously doing that in very intense, under very intense circumstances. People are getting hurt, people are dying, and they're oftentimes looking for you for a type of steadiness to give them the confidence they need to know that they're okay and that they're going to be okay.
Got it. You spoke about, the circumstances that you face. So as a young, leader that you went into combat, so how was your first experience? And, if you could describe that or picture it for us.
Sure. My first combat experience was in July of 2004. I'd been in Iraq for just a few weeks, and our platoon, we were being inserted on a dismounted foot patrol. So we were in a column of Humvees and trucks, and we were being basically driven out into a rural area of Al-Anbar province, where we were going to be doing basically 2 days of dismounted foot patrols. Okay. And as I was in the lead Humvee, and as we were driving in, the Humvee I was in was hit with an IED. It was actually 4 artillery shells dug into the side of the road. And the person who had emplaced them so deep in the side of the road that when they exploded, the blast actually fountained up over our Humvees and managed to not kill us. It shattered the window right by my face. But anyways, I remember I got out of the truck. I did what I was trained to do, and the Marines did what they were trained to do, which was to stop, check the area, look for any type of triggerman or anyone who had initiated the IED, and everyone reacted and did their jobs. And, within a couple of hours, we were back on the road, got inserted for our patrol, and finished our patrol. So that was my first ever combat experience.
Got it. I have another question. Did you always wanted to be a Marine, or you had some other career opportunities and then you jumped on this? So if you could answer that.
Sure. I always had I would say I joined the Marines for really 3 reasons. The first was, I wanted a job where whether I was good at my job or bad at my job had real consequences. In short, I wanted responsibility at a young age. I also grew up overseas for a number of years in London, but even just being in London, I think it gave me a little bit of a perspective of the ways the United States was different and made me want to contribute back and serve the United States. And I would say the last variable was, I was sort of one of those kids who never stopped playing with his GI Joes. I'd always just had like a fascination with the military. And when you combine those 3 factors, it led me into the Marines. I didn't always know I wanted to go into the Marines, but when I was about 17, I sort of made that decision. I was going to go into the military. And then when I narrowed down that search, the Marine Corps made the most sense to me.
Got it. Elliot, you also spoke about, your deployment during the Lebanese War, where you rescued a lot of US citizens. If you could tell us, how was that experience?
I'll be honest with you, just sort of compared to the deployment I'd been on before that was in Iraq. And so the war between Israel and Lebanon, we as Americans were sort of third-party bystanders. So our job was to which is a classic Marine Corps job, was to evacuate the embassy and get Americans out of Lebanon through the embassy. So it was really a logistics operation. The platoon I was leading at that time was an 81 millimeter mortar platoon. And our secondary job was what they call TRAP, which is the Tactical Recovery of Aircraft and Personnel. So basically, if any aircraft or helicopter gets shot down, the TRAP platoon is on standby to go recover the aircraft and the pilots. So our platoon spent most of that deployment kind of on what we call like ready 30, meaning sitting there with all our gear ready to go at 30 minutes notice to recover any aircraft were it to be shot down or have to crash land for mechanical reasons. So as you probably know, a lot of being in the military is hurry up and wait. And that experience was definitely a lot of, being on ship and hurrying up and waiting. But unlike the, war in Iraq, it was a classic Marine Corps deployment. We were on Navy ships doing that Marine mission of evacuating embassies. So, that was sort of what that deployment was like.
Got it. So I understand from a conventional role, you moved on to the special operation role. So how was that transition for you?
It was pretty seamless for me. I had actually, when I was in the ROTC program in college, I had for a couple summers, and one summer in particular, I sort of managed to talk my way in to some of the commando training, what we used to call the Marine Corps reconnaissance training. And so I had, before I went into the infantry, I graduated specifically from they don't really run the course in the same way these days, but it was called the Amphibious Reconnaissance School, which made you a recon Marine. So I knew from that experience just already a number of people who were in the Marine Corps Special Operations community. So when I was coming out of the infantry, I was petitioning pretty hard to go over to that community. One of the things that was interesting was when I showed up at what is now called 2nd Marine Raider Battalion, it was a brand new unit that had just been stood up in 2000. It was stood up in 2006, and I got there in January of 2007. So we were really sort of building this special operations unit in the days that I was there. And I have a number of friends who are in U.S. Army Special Forces, and they would always say to me, "Wow, this is so cool! You guys are, it's a brand new unit, and you're building it. You guys are like the Green Berets in the 1950s." I'd say, on the one hand, it's cool that we're getting to build it. On the other hand, it's an enormous headache. It's a lot of growing pains. But I now look back with a lot of pride that I can count myself among the very first Marine Raiders who stood up some of these units in 2006, 7, and 8. And just to finish your question, when we deployed, we deployed to Afghanistan, and we were partnered with an Afghan commando battalion. So I led a team of 14 Marines, much smaller team, but much more seasoned and senior team. So unlike in the infantry, where the average Marine is 19 or 20 years old, here the average Marine was in their, mid to late 20s or even early 30s. These are guys who've been around on lots of deployments. And our small team were the advisors to a 700-man Afghan commando battalion. And we would plan our missions with them, train them, and really work hand in glove with these Afghans. That was very rewarding.
Got it. Since you spoke about, your role in the Afghanistan, if there are any memories, in your deployment in Afghanistan, which you would like to share, what would that be?
Oh, most of my memories are just of the guys I was there with, and the work that we did standing up this unit. Kind of the cross-cultural bonds you would build. My Afghan counterpart was a grizzled old Afghan lieutenant colonel who his name was Colonel Jabbar, like Kareem Abdul-Jabbar, the basketball player. He was very tall. Mm-hmm. And I remember when I was first meeting him, I don't speak Dari well, but I was rehearsing a little bit of Dari, and I went up to him and I wanted to make a good first impression. So I said, Commandant Jabbar, Isme man Torank Ackerman, Ozdidim Shama Khush Khodam, which means Colonel Jabbar, my name is Captain Ackerman, and Ozdidim Shama Khush Khodam is Dari. It basically means like seeing you brings me great joy.
Okay.
And so he looked at me and said, Toran Ackerman? I said, yes, Toran Ackerman. He said, Toran Ackerman? Oh, Toran Ackerman, Bisiyar Khubasti, which means like, this is the best. And I was like, and everyone was sort of laughing. And I said to him, I said to my interpreter, like, what's so funny? And my interpreter said, oh, Kahraman is Dari. It means like Captain Brave Guy, Captain Hero. You are Captain Hero. And I said, yes, Ismaiman Toran Kahraman. I'm Captain Hero. So, and I was with my team sergeant at the time, and his nickname was Squirrel. That's what everybody called him, kind of as a joke. And so he tried to translate my name as Gunnery Sergeant Squirrel, and they couldn't really get the translation. So he was Gunnery Sergeant Tree Rat. So our entire deployment, I got to be Captain Brave Guy, and he was Sergeant Major Tree Rat. So if you ask me what I remember from those deployments, like, yes, there's there's combat missions we ran. I'm proud of that, but the things that stay with me the most are, the people you're there with, the memories like that you have.
Got it. So, Elliot, if I can ask you, out of so many operations that you have done, so many deployments you have been in, any situation or, combat which you still remember was one of the toughest and you were able to come out of it? What would that be? Anyone?
Oh, geez. I mean, the most intense sustained combat I was ever involved with was in Fallujah in 2004. That was there was really 1 week there that was just a very intense all day, every day. It was a running gunfight. And again, a lot of guys I served with got hurt there. So I would say, in terms of an overarching mission, that's the one that was the most intense. People have at times asked me, what that experience was like. Sort of the closest thing I've ever come to trying to describe it is, if you watch the movie Full Metal Jacket by Stanley Kubrick, it was a lot like the Vietnam scenes that were filmed in Way City in Full Metal Jacket. I mean, it really bizarrely seemed almost exactly like that movie for those weeks, just sort of house to house fighting, sleeping in, destroyed buildings, and seeing just sort of like the gradual erosion of your platoon as guys got hurt, got rotated out, things like that. So I would say, any overarching mission, I would say that maybe that Fallujah battle, from my times as a special operator, there's several raids I was involved in that were pretty, at moments, intense and harrowing. I can remember on a couple occasions, there would be what we would call the cherry ice call when you would go on a raid. So cherry/ice. And all that means is when you would be coming in on the helicopters, you're blacked out in the back of these helicopters and everyone's kind of hooked in, mostly they're hooked into the IC system. It's the internal communication system from the pilots. And we would be hooked into our radios, and you would usually have a gunship search kind of coming overhead that would be orbiting or some type of surveillance. And about 3 to 5 minutes out, they would do what they call the zone. They would call the zone cherry, or they would call the zone ice. Ice basically means it's a cold landing zone. There's no one there, no bad guys. And cherry means like, hey, it looks like there's bad guys on the landing zone. And so I can remember a couple of times when we were coming in on a raid, and you get the cherry ice call, and the gunship will call cherry, and you have to pass to all the guys, landing zone is cherry, it's cherry. And then, everybody gets pretty serious as you land onto a cherry landing zone. So that only happened a couple of times, but I'd say those were pretty intense moments as well.
Got it. Elliot, since you have served for, many years and experienced various things in Iraq and Afghanistan, if I can ask you, any 3 lessons or life lessons that you have learned from your experience when you look back, what would they be? Any 3?
Any 3? Let me try to start with 1, and then I'll see if I make it to 3 life lessons. People are eminently adaptable. You can survive just about any situation. I just say this, there were times certainly in Iraq and Afghanistan where, whether it was our operational tempo or our living conditions or just the conditions that we were in, were pretty hard. And I remember at moments being like, geez, like, how am I gonna keep up with this, like at this pace, or just keep going? And you do, you always, you find the ability to adapt, and typically you're fine. So just human beings in general, we are a remarkably resilient species. And I think sometimes we underestimate our resiliency. Another life lesson I would say is, I've seen a lot of people do pretty brave things. And one thing I learned is that, why do they do that? Like, where does that type of courage come from? So I would just tell you, I know what it feels like to be afraid. I've certainly been very afraid on certain moments. Like, I know that's an emotion. Fear is definitely an emotion, but what makes a person behave in these brave ways, because bravery is not an emotion, right? You don't like wake up and say, oh, I feel brave today. You don't feel brave. That's not an emotion. So what is the opposite of fear? I would say the opposite emotion is love. And the reason I've seen the reason I've seen people do incredibly brave things, like run out into the street where there's a machine gun shooting to get your buddy who's hurt, or follow your buddy through a doorway when you know there's a bad guy on the other end of it. I would say it's love. These guys love each other. That's so much. It's not talked about all the time, but so much of what being in these units is about. We'll say, oh, it's friendship, it's camaraderie, but it's love. It's platonic love that people have for each other. The reason units cohere is that type of love. And the opposite, ultimately, of fear is love. And any good military unit kind of runs on that type of love and respect the guys all have for each other. So that's certainly a life lesson. And kind of deriving from that life lesson, I would offer another one, which I would say is sort of one of the paradoxes of war, which is that, when you train to go on deployment, at least in the U.S. military, the way it would work was, you come back from one deployment and then, you take some time off, and then slowly you go to a new unit and you get ready to go on the next deployment. And, the unit would kind of come together. All the guys would, this guy would show up, that guy would show up, and then you'd go into a training process. And, anywhere from it'd be 6 to 9 months before you all would be ready to deploy overseas back to the war zone together. And during that time, you're kind of, you're building these bonds, what we call like technically unit cohesion. It's bonds. Guys are learning how to work together. They're learning how to get along. You're building this love, that's going to sustain you in the tough days ahead. And so if you're any type of a leader, whether you're like a corporal, all the way up to a general, any type of leadership position, you have to follow orders, right? You have to follow orders to achieve the mission. In the Marine Corps, they often say, and teach you rightly so, like the mission comes first. The mission actually comes before the men, because if the men came first, you wouldn't sacrifice them to achieve the mission. So the mission is what matters. So, that if things get bad, you're going to have to sacrifice. Some of you are going to be sacrificed to achieve the mission. Some of you are going to be destroyed. But in order to accomplish that mission, you have to build these bonds of love. So at a certain point, you might be called upon as a leader, whether you're a fire team leader, or a platoon commander, a company commander, or a battalion commander. If things get hot enough, you will be called upon to basically give orders that necessitate you destroying the very thing that you love. There's a paradox there. You have to learn to love that thing to do the mission, but in order to achieve the mission, you have to destroy the thing that you love. And oftentimes, there's sort of, you see people come back from war and, they're saddened, they feel rootless. I would say what they are is they're kind of heartbroken. War can break your heart, and your heart can't break if you weren't in love. So, and that's something I don't think gets talked about all the time. Oftentimes war gets talked about, not necessarily on emotional terms, but wars are very, they're emotional things. I don't mean dramatic, it's like dramatic types of emotions, but the coherence that units need to do these missions are certainly, based on those types of love. And there are paradoxes that exist when you have to destroy the thing that you love. So maybe that's another life lesson.
Got it. So since you're also an author, so if you could speak about the various books that you have written and also the motivation behind them.
Sure. Well, I'm the author of 6 books, so I don't know that I necessarily need to go through every single one for you. But I write novels. I also write nonfiction. I write journalism. And many of the books I've written have been about wars and themes that exist in war, but they've also been about other things. Frequently, I use war as a way to talk about other themes that I'm interested in, themes like love and loyalty and family. I work as a journalist as well. I write for a number of publications, from the New York Times, the New Yorker, the Atlantic, Time Magazine. And I find that my journalism frequently, it feeds my fiction, that that it allows me to explore issues that eventually manifest into like a novel, for instance. But I also find that, journalism and fiction, the writing I do, there's a lot of similarity between them. You're trying to weave a story, you're trying to illuminate themes for a reader. That's what I've always try to do in my work. So, if you're someone who's interested in politics, in war, and how kind of wars echo out into people's relationships, their lives, and the societies they live in, you probably enjoy my work.
Got it. So Elliot, my final question to you would be, because you have been in multiple combats. So in any combat, what would be your favorite weapon that you're allowed to use?
My radio.
Okay.
Because your radio, I was an officer, so my job wasn't to be, shooting my rifle and blasting away with my pistol. My job was, I was like the conductor in the orchestra, right? The conductor doesn't play an instrument. You sure, like there's weapons I like. Maybe the conductor likes a violin or an oboe, but your job is to be coordinating everything, and the way you do that is with your radio. So my favorite weapon was my radio.
Got it. So Elliot, thanks a lot, for your time on this session. And I hope, a lot of people in my audience will get to know about your life and experiences that you had, and will definitely read upon you and know more about you. So thanks again for your time, and happy that you accepted the invite and came on this show.
Thank you, Akash. I enjoyed our conversation.